For today's communion message, I'm taking inspiration from a parable told in Judges chapter 9. Now, I don't really recommend that you even open to that. It won't have very much relevance to what we're doing. I'm just letting you know so that later on you can look up Judges chapter 9 and know that I'm not crazy. Hang on. I'm going to tell you a story this morning. Here it is. The trees of the world once set out to anoint a king over themselves. They looked to every majestic member of their world and they considered all the reasons that each should be king. First, they went to the bristlecone pine, a living thing that dates back over 5,000 years. And for its longevity, they assumed that he must have the wisdom to rule well. And so they asked him, "Will you be king?" But the bristlecone failed them because he could really only be himself in one situation. He only had the ability to stand in an environment that he knew and could not even exist in another environment, could not think another way. And so they turned from that one and they went to the giant sequoia, the largest non-clone living thing in the world, standing as some of the tallest and also the largest by mass of all the trees. As king of the trees, this one would surely be very impressive. But the sequoia's limit was its undoing. It eventually hits a limit. It can only continue to grow so much, and then it begins to die from the inside, and it falls. And when a giant like that falls, its fall is great. And so they turned their attention from that one and they turned to the aspen. The mighty aspen grove, a single organism represented by thousands of stems. A tree that can replicate itself far and wide, taking over ground for miles around. And one that has a beautiful appearance, whether you're talking about winter with no leaves or the fall or the summer. It looks beautiful all the time. But the trees decided not to make the aspen their king because it was too greedy for the ground. And they knew that given enough time to be itself and to be in charge, the aspen would crowd out all the others and it would choke the kingdom of the trees rather than letting the others thrive. And so then they turned to maybe a surprising one for us, not a North American plant here. They turned to the date palm. This is an impressively tall tree, many of them standing almost 100 feet tall. And more than that, it produces a fruit with such sweetness that it gets used in place of honey or sugar cane in some cultures because there is so much sugar, so much sweetness in dates. And the date palm produces a lot of fruit of this type, sometimes over 1,000 fruits on a single tree. Now, what could be better than an impressive presence and the giving of sweet gifts if you're looking for a king? But the problem is the date palm is slow to mature. It spends a long portion of its life as, I guess what you'd call an adolescent tree. And it's susceptible to pests that can kill off whole populations of this tree at a time. And so, some of the trees decided that despite its appearance and what it could offer, it was just too weak to be their king. And so they began to despair, and they worried that there was none who was truly worthy to be their king. Now, to be sure, along the way, some of the trees put themselves forward as king. Some of the fruit trees sought to be recognized, and some of the trees with wonderful, beautiful hardwoods sought to be recognized, like the ebony and the mahogany. Some of them bragged that they could survive harsher conditions than all the others. There is a tree in South America that grows above 17,000 feet above sea level, and it had bragging rights, or at least thought it did, and wanted to be elevated to kingly status. But ultimately, all of them fell short. And then a little sapling started to grow. And it wasn't anything remarkable. No sapling really ever is. It grew out of the same ground where a king of the trees had come from a long time before. But that ground had been forsaken and empty for as long as most of them could remember. And so the trees thought very little of this little sapling, not only because it was small and unremarkable, but because it came from a place where no tree survived or thrived for very long. It started off like all trees do, small, unknown, unnoticed, insignificant. But it grew. And something about it made a few of the others believe that it should be king. Though they didn't know much about it, and it didn't seem like much, there was just something that they could tell about it, that it was made of the right stuff through and through. Now again, very few could see this, but the others, and the others couldn't. They still wanted to make themselves the king of the trees. They saw this little sapling as a threat, and the more that others saw it as good, the more threatening it became to the crowds. Some were jealous of it. Some just thought, that little thing, why would that have any worthiness? But that little tree, that little sapling, was destined to be king of the trees. Not by standing so tall that it impressed the others, not by producing such special fruit that the others honored it, not by outliving the oldest among the others, but it was destined to be king because it kept its essence pure. It was destined to be king by being content to be a simple, beautiful, living and growing thing exactly as God had made it to be. And just by purely being itself, it was impervious to all the weaknesses and the limitations and the selfish tendencies and the outside threats that plagued the others. It was its purity that helped it maintain its tenderness, but it was also its purity that gave it a kind of strength that even the mightiest conifers could not match. It was admittedly never accepted by all the trees as king, but the ones that knew, they knew. They knew what they had, and they knew that they had found perfection. Still small and unremarkable in some ways, but utterly, brilliantly perfect. And that little perfect plant was their king, even if others never realized its specialness. A poet once asked this question: who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. Brothers and sisters, our King may not come across as mighty or impressive or as a figure that others would look to as a world changer. But we who know really know. We know the perfection that he embodies, that he is perfect in the eyes of God, and that perfection makes him the only one worthy to be the king. He may look weak to the world. There may be nothing majestic to make them admire him. But he grew up before God like a young plant, a tender shoot out of dry ground, utterly perfect in every way. And we eat and drink the supper in honor of our King, celebrating both his grandeur and his humility, celebrating him as the one who had no beauty, but whom we desire anyway, because of the grace of God revealed in him. He grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. And yet, he reigns as king. Long live our King.